Glad to be with you today. I'm part of an organization called Together Chicago. Today, we're not really here to talk about Together Chicago in this session. We're going to talk about the concept of economic development in Chicago more broadly. And I have with me a team of folks who have been doing economic development in Chicago for much longer than I have. I'm kind of a newbie to this. So we have 4 different organizations that are going to talk today. I thought what we'd do is kind of just quickly set the stage for a little bit of the history of Chicago. And I'm going to do in 60 seconds what Joel Hammernick does in about 4 hours. And he does it much better than I can. But kind of give a really quick historical context on sort of this thing called the Great Migration that occurred, African Americans coming to Chicago. So quickly I'm going to walk through this. So between 1916 and 1970, over 7 million African Americans left the South, came to the great industrial cities of the North, Chicago being one of them. And over 500,000 African Americans came to Chicago. There was kind of a peak of that happening in the 50s and 60s. Before that happened, Chicago was about 2% African American, and after that happened, it was about 33%. And still to this day, Chicago is roughly a third, white, Hispanic, and African American. There's about 6% Asian, I think, something like that. During this period, and this is the really complex part that I'm just glossing over very quickly, but there was massive white flight that left. At one time, a lot of the southern parts of the city and the west parts were mostly white. For example, Woodlawn, where Sunshine is, was predominantly white in the 50s, and 10 years later, there were 80,000 African Americans living in Woodlawn. So this massive, in 10 years, this massive turnover occurred. And during that time, there was all kinds of unscrupulous practices where really bad things happened. And there were a lot of deep losses in equity value for a lot of African American families. Very unfortunate. And in one book I read called Family Properties, it said that at one point in the peak of this, there was over $1 million a day of equity value that got lost from the communities, African American communities. So that's kind of taking us up to the 70s. And since then, due to a lot of global factors, like just the way the world has changed, the rise of the industrial might of China and India and many other large companies, manufacturing's left the United States in a big way. A lot of things have happened. A lot of the jobs have left, and lots of things have happened on the south and west sides, where there's the ultimate effect of that has been there's this incredible depopulation. And folks who are not from Chicago might not really have understood the depth of this, but just taking 3 communities here, Woodlawn, Englewood, and Washington Park, the average decline in population over that 65 years is about 75%. So you can imagine the extent of the dislocation, the number of vacant houses, vacant properties, abandoned lots, all kinds of things. So that's sort of the context of the south and west sides. I just wanted to kind of set that very quickly. Now, there's a lot of beautiful things about the south and west sides. I'm not here to criticize at all. There's a lot of wonderful things happening, but from kind of a purely economic lens, there's been a lot of dislocation that's happened historically, okay? So what I want to do is we'll kind of start quickly with, just because I have this slide deck up, and then we're going to pass over to my other speakers, but what Together Chicago is trying to do. I'm going to pass over quickly and have Mark come up and just talk for just a few minutes about some things that we're trying to do. And we're going to pass it to, so my other speakers are Joel Hammernick. Joel, if you could stand for a second. The great Joel is the Executive Director of Sunshine Gospel Ministries. Dave Doig is the head of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, both long-time working in economic development in Chicago. And Whitney Smith, right. I know Richard better than I know Whitney, but Whitney's awesome. She's going to speak to us from Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, which has been doing incredible things also on the Near West. So, Mark, come speak to us.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, I'm Mark O'Heller, and thanks for taking time out to think about these things with us. I'll just say my background is starting and running engineering-centric manufacturing businesses, the west side of Chicago, western suburbs, up in Wisconsin, and I am not an expert. I'm a guy who's tried some things, had some successes, had some failures. Here is what Together Chicago's emphasis has grown into. It's one path that I think is a really worthwhile path, but there's a lot of things that a lot of people can and should be doing. in this huge tapestry of economic development. But here's the lane that we're finding ourselves comfortable and excited about pursuing. And that is this: to drive financial flows from the global marketplace back into Chicago's urban landscape. That's the overarching objective, to drive financial flows from the global marketplace back into Chicago's urban landscape. So not driving government grants or charitable funds or who knows, whatever all things. It's private sector, marketplace financial flows back into Chicago's urban landscape. How? By attracting, establishing, growing local businesses that produce globally competitive goods and services for sale to Chicago large businesses and distributors and companies beyond Chicago. So in a sense, from a community in Chicago, exporting value out of that community, and the financial flows is that revenue then that comes from those sales back into the community. Not a very complicated model. We are in the process of trying to develop a 25-acre manufacturing campus on the south side. We think that it will bring about 1,000 jobs with it into that location. It'll require a lot of workforce development type skills to support people coming into those jobs, being ready for those jobs. There is an opportunity. We're contracted with a major healthcare provider on the west side of Chicago to help them localize their supply chain. They buy $500 million a year worth of stuff. Plus they pay gazillions of dollars in wages. They buy $500 million a year of goods and services, and they've contracted with us to help them find local suppliers for as much as that is possible. Between them and their peers like them on the west side, we think there's about $100 million worth of goods and services that could be sourced locally. We're talking about healthcare related disposable plastic things and metal things and fabric things and those categories alone, it's about $100 million that currently they're sending their financial flows to low-cost providers in Asia for those items. And we're saying, buy them locally, not for $1 an hour wages, but using advanced manufacturing technologies, which is my career background, using advanced manufacturing, produce them with people that are making head of household type wages. Okay, so that's localizing the supply chain. To this third item here, acquiring and revitalizing at-risk businesses. There are over 1,000 manufacturing businesses in Chicago that are owned by people who have silver on top, or not so much on top anymore. This silver tsunami, this wave of old white guys who don't have a succession plan for their businesses. Their kids are thinking about retirement. Their grandkids are attorneys and coders and whatever all they're doing. Nobody's lined up to take over Grandpa's business. Grandpa's 75 to 92 years old, and he is thinking, I'm going to just go down with the ship. I'm going to work to the last day of my life. And we're saying there's a better plan for that. That plan would be bring that business into ownership, modernize, professionalize, improve it, and move it maybe a half a mile or a mile from its current location into west side, south side of Chicago, have that be a part of this revitalized engine of economic activity on the south and west sides. One last piece, this thought of, well, it's great if people have a job there. As soon as they can afford it, they're going to commute into that if it's not a great place to live. So Together Chicago, we're not going to go into this here, but we've got other initiatives around surrounding elementary schools in those neighborhoods, make them great places of learning. Workforce development, home ownership, creating homes that are robust, beautiful, super energy efficient, and at a price point that's roughly the price point that they're paying locally for rent. With the help of financial institutions who have a commitment to do something in these neighborhoods, we are gently helping twist their arms just a little so that they'll do these things in these neighborhoods that will permit home ownership with equity growth in these beautiful structures for people to live in not too far from work, with good schools their kids can go to, with these high-paying jobs that are being built back into the neighborhood. So that's kind of our thought on economic development as it relates to community transformation.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
All right. So that's one kind of economic development, one kind of philosophy. I want to ask Dave Doig to come up. Dave is, I would say, kind of anything I've learned about this, I've either learned from Joel or from Dave. Dave is a master. He has done more. I don't know. I could just sing your praises all day long, but I'll stop and let Dave speak for himself. He's the head of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. He can tell what God's been doing.
Thanks, Dave. So I didn't bring my slides, but I'll talk a little bit about Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives and what we do and kind of how we approach economic development. So Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives is a non-for-profit community development corporation. We were started about 10 years ago on the far south side. So most of our work is in the Pullman neighborhood. How many of you are familiar with the Pullman neighborhood? So Pullman has a wonderful history. Pullman was one of the first worker towns. It was where George Pullman built the rail cars that ultimately went all over America and all over the world. But Pullman, one of his geniuses was he created this very compact, very livable, walkable, some would describe it as kind of new urbanist. It's actually like old urbanist town that much of the fabric and architecture of the community remains today. And the community's had a long history of preservation and community activism. But what's also interesting about Pullman is we're in an area on the far south side that has suffered huge amounts of disinvestment. So the area we work in, the Calumet region, was the hub of the steel industry in Chicago for decades, really for about 50 years. When that left in the 70s, left the area devoid of literally hundreds of thousands of jobs, and the area has been on kind of a steady decline, really starting in the 70s. So the cool thing is, though, our area has the greatest confluence of rail, water, and road of any place in North America. We have all 5 of the Class A railroads. We have 8 highways that all intersect in our area. And we have a port that can literally get water freight out to the Atlantic or south to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's an area that has had a lot of disinvestment but has unbelievable public infrastructure. So and it also has a lot of vacant land, a lot of brownfields. So about 10 years ago, we bought the largest of those brownfields. It was a 200-acre industrial site owned by Ryerson Steel. Ryerson had left the community back in the early 2000s, had moved the jobs overseas and to other places in America. So the property was vacant. We bought it. And unlike maybe a typical kind of for-profit developer that would come in with kind of a preconceived set of plans, we took an entire year and basically surveyed the community. So we did a whole community planning process, went to about 70 community meetings, took input from the community, listened to the community, very much kind of a felt need approach. And there were 4 kind of consistent themes that came back, and this was like 2009. The first was the need for access to healthy foods. Our area was a food desert. People were having to travel 5-6 miles north or south to get a bag of groceries. The second was the need for jobs. So this is kind of in the height of the recession. Our area had suffered a lot of disinvestment and joblessness, but that had been compounded by the recession. So we had unemployment rates pushing 32% in our neighborhood. And the third was the need for indoor recreation, which I wouldn't have necessarily ranked as a high priority, but the community really was wrestling with where do I take my kids after school in a safe, kind of welcoming affordable place. Where do I go in Chicago for what could be 5 months of the year when it's really not very pleasant to be outside? Where do I go for a birthday party? So that was the third. And then the fourth was really around affordable housing, particularly as it related to seniors and young people, and in our case, particularly artists that had kind of been moving to the community. So with those kind of four things, we put together a plan, and as God would have it, we went to all of the major retailers, all the major grocers, and everyone said, no thanks, we're just trying to survive. Again, this is 2010. Finally got to Walmart, and Walmart said, yeah, we'll take a gamble on it. Walmart had, as many of you know, saturated suburban, rural, and small city America, had basically tapped every market possible, but they had not been able to get into large urban areas, particularly metro cores, so places like Chicago and LA and Boston, DC. So they had made an effort to kind of make a push to get into urban areas, and their first effort was really here in Chicago, and our interests kind of aligned with theirs. And so we after a year of a lot of negotiating, we were able to develop the first Walmart in the city of Chicago, brought 400 new jobs, and did a community benefits agreement with Walmart. It's the first and only community benefits agreement that Walmart's ever done. They agreed to hire 80% of all of the new positions from the community. They committed $25 million of philanthropic money. They built all their new stores in Chicago with union labor. They agreed to $1 more than the minimum wage. And they built their building in the context of our Pullman architecture, including a green roof. So that kind of started the work. We subsequently developed about another 120,000 square feet of retail. And then recently we pivoted and started to do industrial development. We built the first and only soap factory for a company called Method. How many of you know Method? Yep, so if you buy Method soap, it's made in Pullman. Creates about 150 jobs, and it's a great facility. What's really cool is Method on their roof, they leased their roof to a company called Gotham Greens. It's the largest rooftop greenhouse in the world. It's 75,000 square feet. They grow about 1 million pounds of leafy greens off this roof. They also employ about 60 people. And then just earlier this year, we developed a Whole Foods distribution center, the Midwest Distribution Center for Whole Foods. That created about 150 new jobs. And then we're under construction now on, we've about 85 million of projects that are under construction. We're developing, finally, after 10 years, we're developing this new community center. It's a 135,000 square foot indoor rec center. It's state-of-the-art artificial turf, baseball, football fields. We're building a new greenhouse for Gotham Greens, actually doubling their size, about 150,000 square feet. And we're actually finally getting to the housing, and we're developing 38 units of affordable housing for artists in Pullman. So all in, we've coordinated about $250 million of development, created about 1,800 new jobs. And what's really cool, so those are the outputs. And oftentimes I get frustrated with people that talk about community development because they stop at the outputs and they never get to the outcomes, right? So it's like they talk about numbers of jobs and how much investment, but what's happened in the community? Has the community benefited? So we now are starting to track that, and I can say crime in our neighborhood is down 47%. Violent crime is down 51%. We've seen a 6% decrease in unemployment, 9% decrease in the poverty level. Property values are up 20%. We've seen the number of household incomes over 100,000 double. We've seen college-educated families increase by about 30%. So we're feeling like some of this is actually starting to take hold and have impact. So that's my story, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks. And we're going to have time at the end for questions for anyone. So Whitney, why don't you come up now? And so the Lawndale Christian Development Corporation has been also at this for a long time. Who's heard of the term coach working in Lawndale? Okay, almost everyone. So, all right, you're famous.
That makes it easy.
Here, let me help you. You want to plug in here?
Yes. Sure. I can't take credit. We're an organization, and I was on age, so.
Let's see. What happens this way? Okay. There we go. see. Oh, you were using this guy, right? And right here. There we go. That's it. There we go.
Look at you.
I think it's coming up. Yes.
Perfect. All right, let's see. If you're on. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Whitney Smith. I am the Director of Development for Lawndale Christian Development Corporation. Here to talk to you about the ministries of Lawndale Christian Community Church. And so the first important thing to understand is that there are 4 organizations. There is Lawndale Christian Community Church. There is Lawndale Christian Community Health Center. There's Lawndale Christian Community Development Corporation. And finally, there's the Lawndale Christian Legal Center. And so Lawndale Christian Community Church was started, as you guys, many of you are already aware, by Pastor Wayne and his wife Ann Gordon in 1978. It began with Coach, who was a wrestling and football coach at Farragut High School, working with young men, creating a fellowship of Christian athletes Bible study program. And Richard Townsend is the executive director of the Development Corporation and was fortunate enough to be one of those young men. And he will tell you himself, he went more for the sports than the Bible, but it worked out. So the church began out of Farragut High School, and when it started, it was one building on Ogden that housed everything from the church itself to the basketball court, to the racquetball court, the health center, and the fitness center. And so it was a very crowded space, but full of love and worship service and dedication to community development. Some of the ministries that have grown out of the church along the years are these here. Most impactful, I would have to say, or some of the most impactful, I would have to say, are the Hope House program and the after school program. Hope House was started 20 years ago, and it's seen hundreds of men come through the program. They're returning citizens who really get a soft landing with the Hope House program, where they can begin to rebuild their lives. And many of those men have become homeowners and small business owners and really have done a complete 180 and are now thriving members and productive members of society. The other program I'd like to highlight is our after-school program, which houses our learning center and our computer center, and it's really been impactful in the community and giving access to youth to the latest technology so they can be successful in their education, but also quality programming and a real familial place where they can go after school and bond with other kids and get additional tutoring. Next, I'd like to speak about the Lawndale Christian Health Center, which was founded in 1984, again by the church. It's a separate, all of our entities are separate legal entities with their own board of governance and operating budget. The operating budget for the health center is about $50 million at this point, and it employs over 500 people. It's an economic juggernaut in the community. It has 5 sites, and it primarily services Latino and African American members from the 60623 area code. But it has everything from family medicine, internal medicine, to HIV care, and mental health facilities, which I don't see on there, but very important in communities like ours. And so it's just been a vital anchor to the community and really stabilizing force. The average person who would come to the health center is an infant, or between the ages of infancy and 39 years old, from the 60623 area code, and would be paying via Medicaid. And so it's really a great way for low-income individuals to access healthcare, which we know is a really important and tricky thing in this country. These stats are from 2017, but as you can see, my favorite part of the health center, the fitness center, was able to have 179,000 visits in 2017. And if you come at 6 a.m., You'll find me there most days. But it's just a phenomenal facility. That's 2 floors. It has saunas. It has an indoor track. And it's just really state-of-the-art and something you wouldn't typically see in a community that you think of as economically depressed. And so I think that goes a long way to strengthening people's self-confidence when you can have beautiful facilities like this. One of the new developments that the health center, besides our cafe, the newest development is the farm on Ogden. It opened this year. It's partnered with the Chicago Botanical Gardeners and local urban and rural farmers to put together a hydroponic system whereby they are producing tilapia fish. They're growing them, and that water feeds into the produce and flowers, and really provides a aquaponics systems. Dave, to the rescue. Thank you. I love this. They have every Wednesday they do a farmer's market in the summer, and it's a great place to get your produce. And aside from going into their facility, it's offsite at the cafe, and you can go and pick up anything from cabbage to tomatoes to flowers for your office, like I do. Now, my favorite part, because I work there, is the Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, which was founded in 1987. We focus primarily on commercial and real estate, residential real estate development. It's partnered with local schools and education to provide comprehensive community planning, leadership, property management, and affordable housing. What I want to highlight, and what I was ordered to highlight by Richard Townsell, our executive director, is how instrumental Dave Drake was in the founding of the organization.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm under orders. He was there for the first 5 years of its inception, and really, he's just doing great work all over the city. He was really instrumental in putting together the foundation and structures in place to ensure long-term sustainability and success, even going so far as to work for 6 months without pay. So, yeah. So Richard Townsell was our first full-time executive director, and he began with the organization in 1992 through 2006, and returned to us after a brief hiatus in 2015. So one of the things that I will highlight is our efforts to do a lot of community organizing and really encourage our community residents to grab hold of their own power and their own leverage in the neighborhood and in the city. And so Richard has been the stickler for that since his return, about how we can boost our residents' ability to get things done they want in the city. And so you'll see under our community advocacy information that we have kind of spawned a homeowners association in the neighborhood that organized inspections and renovations of the Douglas Park Library, which is our local library, and it was in kind of dismal situation and with mold and exposed wiring and rodents in the children's play area. And so our residents got together, about 25 of them, put on inspectors' badges, went into the facility, and gained access to every room there, and did a phenomenal job of taking photos and creating a report that was then taken to the Chicago Public Library's board meeting, so we could present that and say, wow, it's awesome that you guys are putting rivers through libraries on the north side. Can we have less mold? Besides that, we have reinvested more than $100 million in both commercial and residential real estate development in North Lawndale, and developed over 300 rental units of affordable housing and 100 single-family homes. These are two of our latest single-family homes that we're working on. This is two of a set of 4 that I'm overseeing and that keep me up at night. They are beautiful gray stones that were just sitting vacant, one of which we were able to get through the Cook County Land Bank. And so we're working towards renovating them and selling them to individuals who may be renters in the community right now, so that we can increase rates of homeownership and really help people to develop themselves personally to that next step in life. Last but not least is our Lawndale Christian Legal Center, which was founded in 2010 and has an annual budget of about almost $4 million with 23 employees. The lawyer in me that I try not to tell anyone about really tips my hat to these guys. They do phenomenal work for the neighborhood. The Restorative Justice Hub and the Restorative Justice Community Court are really cutting edge in the city about how we can begin to grapple with the legacy of policies gone past and really restore our communities from the legal standing with our young men being overexposed to the legal system. And so it's just a really great organization. They employ a 3-tier program as a method of going about this work, and if you have more questions about their organization, you'll have to check their website. Thank you for your time. Oh, one thing I do want to highlight, a phenomenal thing they're doing is the Mac House program, whereby folks who are young people who are involved in the legal system and come through the Lawndale Christian Legal Center get training on how to gain skills in the construction industry. And that ties perfectly with the Development Corporation. So we provide housing for some of those young men, and we also employ some of their young guys on our construction sites, including the 2 that you saw. And so there's this synergy with the programs. Although we're all separate, we do find ways to partner and work together and really support each other as we continue to grow. Thank you.
Thanks, Whitney. It's an incredible story.
Sure.
When did that start?
Which part?
When did Coach first get there again?
He started and Fair did in 78.
78.
Yeah.
Man, it's unbelievable. Yeah. All right, thank you. All right, so Joel Hammernick is the Executive Director of Sunshine Gospel Ministries and Sunshine Enterprises, and you can talk about all of that. So please, Joel.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Joel.
I don't know about you, but when I hear that many $100 million stories, I get a little overwhelmed. My own instinct is to say that all kind of seems impossible. And it's not impossible, so that's cool, right? Because Coach started as literally a wrestling coach and got us done all this. But the originating organization that I'm the director of is a very small faith-based after-school program called Sunshine Gospel Ministries. And for us, as we started thinking about the community that we're in, we live and work in a disinvested neighborhood on the South Side. When we started thinking about some of these topics and trying to ask what could we do, what was sort of commensurate with what we were capable of, I actually said, I don't think I've said this in front of Dave, but we concluded we don't have the capacity to go get a Walmart. Like where we are, that was an overwhelming, that would just be, it would stop us in our tracks, because it was a way of thinking that I'm not even saying we could never be there someday, I'm saying like where we were starting. And so I'm assuming that for some of you working in a local church, working in a small organization, in some ways, grassroots strategies are just as important as some of these big ones. And so that's how ours has evolved. What I would say is when we relocated our ministry from Cabrini Green, a public housing community just a few blocks from here, to the South Side when Chicago started redeveloping Cabrini. We rebuilt our after-school youth programs. And in that context, over a period of about a decade, the equation that I like to say we were wrestling with is the correlation between the absence of work and the presence of violence in our neighborhood. And so we started paying attention to both sides of that equation, but on the work side, asking questions. What's the nature of work? How does it come about? And then what could our role as a stakeholder be? And we ended up landing on centrally the idea that our neighborhood is full of very gifted people who have creative ideas and often are working on some economic development idea on their own. In the neighborhood, it becomes described as a gig or a hustle or just this thing I do. Most of our folks who are doing this don't even think of themselves initially as entrepreneurs or certainly not as business owners. They just are not applying those terms to themselves. And, from outside the neighborhood, you might think, oh, well, when people are doing that, they're like selling drugs or, doing something crazy like that. And it's not that there's none of that, but that is not the main thing. The main thing is doing hair and watching kids and planning parties and painting murals and baking pies and this endless list of stuff that people in disinvested neighborhoods do to supplement whatever their main source of income is. And so what I would say is that our program that we've built is centered around, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it captures the idea. Our sort of typical client for our entrepreneur support work is a 30-something-year-old African-American single mother of two living on less than $30,000 a year. And if her idea can generate $12,000 to $15,000 in annual household income, it will take her family out of poverty. And that is not a business prospect that sounds like much of a business just down the street from us at the Booth School at the University of Chicago. Like that sounds like a tip or something. That doesn't sound like a business. But we know, not only is it unbelievably transformative for the families, but we know what kind of impact that kind of an entrepreneur has on her children. Children's programs is our sort of main thing over the past 30 or 40 years. So we recognize that folks were like this in our community. We recognize that there's probably a lot of them. The statistics would suggest that 5 to 7% of the general population are really genuinely entrepreneurial kind of people, kind of swim to shore kind of people who are going to try something, and if it doesn't work out, they're going to try something else. Entrepreneurs are not usually successful in their first idea. And for a genuine entrepreneur, their first idea is never their last idea, right? So we felt we could identify these kind of folks, and then also researching that we find out that it turns out that in low-income neighborhoods, among immigrant populations, among returning citizens, among high school dropouts, all of those kind of people start businesses at a higher rate than the general population. So it turns out that probably it's safe to bet that a higher percentage than 5 to 7% of the people in our community with the right support would take an idea that is theirs, that they have a dream behind, and if we support them in that, they could see really life-altering effect in their own community. And we had decided about 5 years ago that this is what we were going to do, and we had sort of cobbled together a set of curriculum that would teach business basics. So we don't teach anybody how to do a better job detailing cars or doing hair. We teach them basic business skills: record keeping, bookkeeping, cash flow, break even, basic marketing, basic legal, basic insurance, these kinds of nuts and bolts things that can be applied to any business. And just as we had really sort of identified some different curriculums that we thought made sense, we set this grand announcement, invited some people to it on a Saturday in November of 2012. And the night before, on a Friday night, I was invited to attend something put on by Partners Worldwide called the Marketplace Revolution at Willow Creek. And I heard this young couple, Ethiopian immigrant named Alpha Demolish and her husband Alex Forrester, stand up and explain what they do. They're both young Christians, Harvard grads, and they were doing exactly what we wanted to do, but they were 10 years ahead of us. And they were even on Martin Luther King Drive in Jersey City. So it was like, different city, same neighborhood, And so I got myself invited to dinner with them that night, and then I went to Jersey like 5 or 6 times that year and pressed them until they agreed to license us, basically. We're incredibly good friends now. But what I saw in them was not only sort of the methodology and the outcome tracking and this kind of thing that they had developed that was so valuable, but I saw this underlying value of the people that we serve and the difficulties that they face and way that we could come alongside of them. And so I'll tell you briefly Alpha's story because it so well captures that sense of value. Alpha was born in Ethiopia. When she was 2, the country descended into chaos, and they began executing the educated class within the country, including some of her family members. She ended up in a refugee camp in Addis Ababa. Her mother got a green card and made it to Boston. And when she got to Boston, she got a job as a waitress. And the waitress job provided her enough money basically to rent her apartment. But her dream, obviously, was to be reunited with her daughter. And so she began sewing gowns in her bedroom. And it took her 10 years to save enough money to be reunited with her daughter, Alpha. So Alpha came over at 12 years old, not speaking any English. By the time she graduated high school, she got into Harvard and has gone on to really be a world transformative leader. I mean, she's a Davos Young Global Leader now. She's like internationally recognized. It's really, really crazy. But one of the things that she has said, Alpha has said, and she sort of moves around in these crazy circles now with all the people that she's introduced to. But Alpha would tell you that to this day, she's never met a more successful entrepreneur than her mom. And yet she knows that her mom's experience during that 10 years, had her mom sat down in front of a banker, her mom would have felt stupid. And the banker may very well have thought she was stupid and could not have been close enough to see the value of the work that she was doing. But as Christians, when you really pay attention to the nature of work and the value of work, then you realize that it's not about how many dollars someone's generating, right? It's about the expression of a gift that God has given you that is an act of love. And it really begins to sort of redefine how we think about things like capitalism and free enterprise and things like this, right? Like as a Christian, what we think is God has given everyone gifts. And when they properly express that gift, that whether it's baking an amazing apple pie or painting an amazing picture or building a quality chair, right, that there's a fair exchange for that, and there's really, it's an act of love for those gifts to be exchanged even in the marketplace. And so when we work with entrepreneurs, what we're doing is fostering this idea that they really are entrepreneurs, that they really are expressing their gifts. What they're doing is, when you do it ethically, when you do it well, that it's an expression of love, and that it is genuinely transformative. It's an expression of what they were designed to do and how they were designed by a God who loves them to impact the world. And out of that naturally comes other impacts. These entrepreneurs they're genuinely leaders. But the work that they've done, that they're doing, is often set in a stage that's sort of fraught with challenges and is often undervalued. So a big part of what we do is work around themes like shame and courage and try to establish trust so that people can be really honest about what they know and what they don't know. We build social capital within the groups of entrepreneurs that we're working with. We work with 10 to 15 at a time in cohorts. And they build social capital with one another, where they're able to encourage each other and learn from each other. But we also build an external social capital where we can invite them into circles that we have an easier time intersecting with. So we introduce them to bankers in safe ways. We introduce them to lawyers and to marketing people and to website people and this kind of a thing, so that at the end of this 12-week program that our students go through, they can say, yeah, I do know a banker, or yeah, I do know a lawyer, or I do know, ways to think about marketing and those kind of things. And then after the 12 weeks of working with folks in a classroom setting on the general concepts of building a business, we then shift to one-on-one coaching and mentoring and help them to think not so much in terms of planning, but in terms of action. What is the next thing that you need to do? Most entrepreneurs function more on the side of action than planning. You really pay attention to what they're doing, and you just got to do the next right thing. You need to know what the priority is, and you need to do something. And so that's really the mode that we work with. In that setting, so post-graduating from our Community Business Academy and entering into a coaching and mentoring, we then are basically taking the sort of disposition that says, there are other things out there that eventually our entrepreneurs will need to build their business. One is obviously financial capital, and so we believe we can get almost any of our entrepreneurs ready for it over time. So good credit, basic record keeping, when established over a period of 2 or 3 years, you can get a loan. So you may not be able to get a loan now, but we can work with you over time to get access to financial capital. We try to get people to access the right financial capital as well. So not credit cards, not loan sharks, not payday lending, stuff like that, but appropriate capital. We also take the same approach to thinking about procurement opportunities. It's a little bit of what Mark and Dave were touching on in some of their work. Like there's a lot of dollars spent by institutions in our community that spend the money far away. And so we're trying to think about how we line up procurement opportunities, basically sales opportunities for our entrepreneurs. And then, so just sort of quickly to summarize in terms of the scale that we're working on. So Sunshine Enterprises has become a distinct nonprofit. Sunshine Gospel is very focused on one neighborhood, youth outreach, a little bit of local real estate development, service learning. Sunshine Enterprises is focused on entrepreneurs in disinvested neighborhoods throughout the city. So we're on the south side, the west side, and the north side. We have a current 5 cohorts that are operating right now that will wrap up at the end of the year, and we'll have a total of about 600 graduates of the program so far. So we're serving about 300 unique entrepreneurs annually at this point, and are growing to, we think, a scale point around 700, 750 entrepreneurs annually that we'll work with. About 50% of the people that have graduated from our program are in business making some form of sales. Another 35 to 40% are working on their business idea. So we have around 10 or 15% that's sort of natural attrition. Basically, people conclude they need to do something else. And so then we're tracking businesses created, jobs created, revenues added to the business, household income changes. It turns out that often people go get a better job as a result of being in the program, which is really interesting. We didn't sort of anticipate that initially, but you learn in the credit and the budgeting portions of the class that the best money is your money when it comes to investing in your business. So a little better job puts you in a better position to invest in your own business. I think that's another thing that people might feel awkward about the idea. They want to be an entrepreneur and they're pretty sure that means they're supposed to quit their job and go work on their business. But in actually almost any place in the world, that's not how it works. Normally, entrepreneurs keep their decent job until the business is to a point where they can shift. So we help people think about that kind of thing. We've begun tracking home ownership because it turns out our entrepreneurs started buying homes once they got a little more household income, worked on their personal credit, found out that they could talk to a banker. And so those kind of things are coming out of it, and it's really been exciting to think about sort of seeding the community at a broad scale with entrepreneurs who are being affirmed in the work that they're doing.
So you've heard 4 stories of 4 wonderful things that are going on, and all really, motivated by the love of Christ. It's the love of Christ that compels us to do work. God gives us creativity, and He wants us to express that creativity in the world. And so, I just love all those stories. I mean, it's fantastic. So I'm going to open up for questions. Ask any of us. Why don't you guys all stand if you don't mind with me, and just any question. We have 10 minutes, 8 minutes, so we can take a handful of questions. Just about anything to do with sort of economic development, and particularly in the Chicagoland area, or philosophically, anything. But yes, in the back.
I have a question about your entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a couple stories about the most successful businesses that have been started?
Yeah. So let me put a little asterisk, and I'll tell you that in a second. But what I would say is, don't miss this. That the potentially the most successful entrepreneur is just the mom who generates $10,000 a year, and that in our neighborhood is sort of not visible, basically, right?
Well, how about the highest grossing revenue then?
Well, I guess my point is that would potentially miss the point. So yeah, do we have some businesses over $100,000 a year in revenue? We do, and but that's not what we're after. I'm not saying we're against that. And because we're going to work, we think we'll serve about 5,000 entrepreneurs over the next decade. We'll probably have a bunch of those. But I've had people say to me, there's got to be like the person with the next Uber ideas. And there's one of those people in your neighborhood. I'm like, that's absolutely true, but I don't know how to find them. That's the needle in the haystack. But for every one of those, we can find 1,000 people who can bake pies or watch children or plan parties or paint murals, right? So our strategy is really to work at a wide scale with these micro businesses. But yeah, we have a window washing guy who's doing about $150,000 in annual revenue right now, and he's doing it. All of his employees are teenagers in the neighborhood. So in fact, he has a full-time job. And he runs the business, and he doesn't clean windows. He just makes sure that they're cleaned well. We have about 17 people selling products through Whole Foods, mostly skin and hair care or baked goods. In Evanston, because the general client that we work with is typically starting from a slightly more mature economic environment, we have several storefronts that have opened up, and people are running businesses in storefronts there.
Jeannie.
So I just want to thank each of you for enlightening us. I mean, at least me. And I guess I want to ask you, and this is to all of you, what would be your hope for someone like me who I'm just an older white woman. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to get into the jump rope. I feel like you guys are turning the jump rope, and I want to get in there, but I don't know. I don't know how. What does someone like me? What would you hope for someone like me? And now I'm scared that I asked.
That's a good question.
Yeah, anybody. I mean, I'm just
What would
curious.
you
I
say?
call not first. Guys?
So I would ask, so where do you live?
That's a complicated question.
Where in Chicago do you live?
In Roscoe Village.
And what is your giftedness? What have you done? What do you do? What do you feel like you're good at?
I would say I'm probably best at teaching.
And what do you feel inclined to do?
Well, I know, I bought this book on prayer just to start praying for my neighborhood. I thought, well, I know I could do that.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the next question.
Yeah.
I'll go.
Go for it.
Love prayer. Definitely pray. We should all do that. I would say the next thing you can do as someone who likes to teach is the value of learning. So take a look around your own neighborhood, see if there are any organizations, who are doing this kind of work or who know of people who are doing this kind of work near you, who you can get involved from and learn from. I think the easiest way to give back is to be able to walk out of your house and do it. So proximity is important. And so start there. Just learn about what's happening near you that you can become involved with. And if you want to come to an annual dinner.
Great answer.
Yes, over there.
Now I lost track of names around minute 10. So, are you Dave?
I'm Dave.
And he's Dave.
Yeah.
Oh.
The Dave over there.
Listening. You took a year to do it? Why and how? And we're all ready to go run and spend money
Yeah.
and jump through. Tell us to slow down on this one.
Well, I think for us it was, it was really about building trust and accountability with the community. And so, a lot of developers, they'll buy a piece of property and they know exactly what they want to do, and they can execute on that. But whether that's actually going to ultimately benefit the community or they're just going to be able to profit from the community, that decision's already made. Kind of when, and so we took a different approach and said, listen, before we go figuring out what we want to do here, we got to figure out what the community wants, what they need, and so that was the purpose of kind of taking the time to hear from the community, to listen, to understand, and ultimately that was why we got Walmart, right? So we had this big fight, for those of you from Chicago, there was the big box ordinance, they were trying to keep Walmart out. We had, dozens of city council members that were fighting Walmart, and what ultimately kind of carried the day for us was at city council, when we had the Walmart hearing, we had 300 residents supporting Walmart. Walmart never has 300 people. I mean, it's 300 people that are against them usually, but because we had gone through this process, we had listened to the community, we had heard that this was a need, and this was, our neighborhood wasn't just a food desert; it was a retail desert. You couldn't buy a tube of toothpaste, in the community, and so that was a big part of kind of building community support, building building the kind of accountability. So it's some of those kind of be careful what you wish for. But now we've raised the bar, so now it's like, okay, Walmart, that was 5 years ago. Now we got and so now everybody wants to sit down restaurants. So we keep raising the bar in terms of what's. And so it's important that you hear, but it's also important that you deliver. So you have to be able to execute. And I think a lot of our communities have been promised a lot of things, and a lot of those promises have not been delivered on. And so people are very suspicious, very skeptical, for good reason, because they've been lied to. You know, whether it's by the politicians or by other community organizations. And so you have to be very careful when you're taking that input that you have some plan to be able to execute. Otherwise, you're going to lose credibility and not be able to be effective. I mean, it's kind of like being a church, right? You got to if you're going to be a church, be a church. Don't just don't be open on Sunday morning. I mean, be the church and be accountable.
Yes, sir.
Just and it's for anybody, but I think more along the lines because I am a local pastor. So from in Los Angeles, but for Lawndale, how did you all kind of exegete the community to find out what your playing field was? Because of course you got the legal center and social services, you got the CDC. How did you all kind of do that? And I know it may be tied into what Dave was saying, which is more of a listening kind of deal. But how did you all do that from a church to figure out what to create?
I think the most important thing about Lawndale, any portion of the apparatus, is that people live there. One of Coach's first rules was if you wanted to be involved, you needed to live there. So you want a job, buy a house. And so in that way, you spend 5, 10, 20 years in a neighborhood. You don't just live next to your neighbors, you live with your neighbors, you get to know them, they know you. It's listening, but it's listening because you guys see each other when you walk your dogs, you see each other at church, you see each other when you guys walk to the same corner store. Not to say that, the same formal surveying and forums, town halls, and those things don't happen, but it's a lived experience. And that, the head of the Development Corporation lives on Millard. The head of the Legal Center lives on Springfield. The Coach's daughter lives next door. Everyone lives there. And you get to know your community on a really intimate level.
That's a great answer. I apologize, we have to close, but I think everyone's willing to stay and talk a little bit more. So I'm just going to close in a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thanks again for these stories of the way you've been working, Lord. It's just really encouraging and inspiring to hear the way that your church is at work and the creativity that you've given people in so many ways, Lord. Just bless us as we take this all in. Help us to process it and think about the way you want us to be involved. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.